My neighbor tells me, Diane, I've had this super confrontational conversation with my dad. I've had migraines for the last 7 years. He is telling me that I need to get medicated for life. And I told her, what? You're 36. So that means what? 50 years of injections? Are you serious? You know what? I know someone who I think can help. And I'll tell you what to eat. And then you can move on. She eats the food. And then I see her again. And I'm like, how are the migraines? It's like, they're gone. I'm like, oh, great. And I'm like, why did your dad tell you to take injections for 50 years? And she replies to me, because my dad is a renowned neurologist. The best way to make money on top of someone who has migraine is just to leave them in pain and medicate them. That's the business model we're in, unfortunately. When I started this, investors said, can you make them sick longer? It's a problem that you solve it. I was like, what? Can you make them sick longer? I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And I really thought, wow, this is really ingrained in the way we do things because we have a gross domestic product. So we have to produce more money. Therefore, leaving these people in pain is profitable. Is that okay?
Yeah. Welcome back, everyone, to the Integrative Women's Health Podcast. I am thrilled to be here with Diane Ducarme. She comes to work with women and men, but we're going to talk about what's particular about working with women and migraines. But not just that. We take migraines as a symptom of deeper, more complex health challenges in the very same way that over here we're often looking at things like endometriosis or MCAS or the perimenopause transition or any kind of chronic pain as not being in isolation, but a red flag, a yellow light, a warning sign of something being off with the system. So Diane comes to us with a really interesting background, which we just briefly talked about. And I want to let her share that with you because I think for those of us who are trained in this kind of one foot in one academic area and one foot in another academic area, we're lucky to see problems in a different way. And one of the things we briefly touched on before we hopped on here is that I think we're all aware that AI is going to be absolutely changing the game in healthcare very soon. Very soon, within the next decade at least. So let's start off, Diane, with why migraines and what is your perspective on migraines?
So thank you so much. I started to work on migraines when my sister told me she was having migraine that day. I was not being a saint because most people, when they hear someone has a migraine, they will hear they have a headache because empathy is what you can relate to as a human, as a person. But that day, we had just lost my uncle and godfather from a glioblastoma, which is a form of brain tumor, as you know, that grows from a pebble to the size of an orange extremely fast. And he had been very well operated, but the tumor regrew very fast. And so he left 4 children behind. And my sister said, I have been having migraines for the last 3 years, and I've done a couple of MRI, but they don't see anything yet. I wonder if I'm not developing what he's had. And so she was very anxious. And because I know nothing, so my background is in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I said to her, I know someone in China where I've worked who is spectacular. Let's contact her. And before we do that, I'd like you to write 3 pages with me of all of the other symptoms that you experience. I want you to tell me everything that is going wrong with your body and for how long it's been going wrong. And so we write the 3 pages together and we take the call together. And Dr. Zhang, with whom now I work, is telling her what to eat and why she's in pain. And 3 to 4 months later, my sister stops having pain. And I leave it at that. I don't think it's special. I don't think it's illogical. I think it's quite normal. She had a few problems inside of her body. Her body manifested like a fire alarm. And we extinguished the fire and the alarm's gone. A couple of years forward, I'm now living in New Zealand. And my neighbor tells me, Diane, I've had this super confrontational conversation with my dad. I've had migraines for the last 7 years. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. And she's like, oh, I just don't like to mention it. And he is telling me that I need to get medicated for life, including having injections. And I told her, what? You're 36. So that means what? 50 years of injections? Are you serious? Of course it didn't mean that. I understand it freaks you out. And you know what? I know someone, and I was working full time in corporate environment. I know someone who I think can help. If you don't mind, we'll do a bit of WhatsApp and WeChat, and I'll ask you a lot of questions. This process might take a bit of time, and then I'll tell you what to eat, and then you can move on. And so we do that a couple of weekends, and she eats the food, and then I see her again. And I'm like, how are the migraines? It's like, they're gone. I'm like, oh, great. And I'm like, why did your dad tell you to take injections for 50 years? And she replies to me, because my dad is a renowned neurologist based in New York. And I tell her, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Your father is, of course, super smart. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a neurologist, let alone super connected, be it New York. And of course, he loves you because you're in touch with him. And father loves his daughter. And so I thought, oh, probably the foods that I gave her mimicked medication. So I went online and I made a huge level of discovery, Jessica, that I want to share with your audience today. And it really hit me that the medication that she was offered were painkillers. So they were attempting to mute her pain. When what I was doing with Dr. Zhang, we were trying to listen to her pain and see, what does it mean? What is your body complaining about? And I really thought, that is so bizarre. He wants to give her a painkiller. That's such a weird idea. And then you think, no, wait a minute. If my child has a headache, I'm likely to give them a Tylenol, but that doesn't make any sense. And so I started to deep dive in my research, and then I realized it was 18% of women, and now it's actually 22% of women, and 5% of men. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's a crispy fact, because it means I've lived in Europe and I've lived in China. It means Western science is missing the point, because here we are in a situation where the female body is not a proxy of the male body. And so I digged up and I found it was genetic. And then I also felt terrible. I thought, wow, if it's a fifth of my girlfriends, oh my God, I'm just such a bad friend. That's how it started.
I love that story because it shows that oftentimes the path of what we choose as health and wellness professionals is related to just a curious question. And it sounds like, because your background is so distinct, you were trained in STEM, went to Harvard to become an MBA, so you have this business perspective. When we think about healing migraines from a broader perspective that integrates traditional Chinese medicine, that integrates nutrition, that that our organization, our motto, if you will, is don't chase symptoms, optimize systems, because the original Western system that I was trained in is really about doing exactly what you said, quieting symptoms without listening to what they're trying to tell us. So tell me a bit more about the Chinese medicine perspective in healing migraines. What kinds of things is the Chinese medicine practitioner looking for?
When you look at something, you ask questions and you look for other symptoms. So you look for, what's the body language. When I started this, I was asking 30 questions, and I was told by a very prolific investor that 30 questions was way too long and no one would answer my questions. Now I have 100 questions, and women, when I was having 60, 70, they're like, oh, amazing questionnaire. You're missing this, you're missing that. And women were adding things. And whereas men would tell me, oh, 18% of women, are you sure? And really? And is that really a problem? And I was like, okay, just you don't get it. It's okay. But it really 100 questions. Why? Because the body's going to have other symptoms. Now, those other symptoms will pertain to other systems, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. This is where it's ambiguous. It's a many-to-many relationship. So if you think of the female body as a factory that produces physical matter. So in her lifetime, a woman is going to lose 23 to 28 liters of menstruation. She's going to produce 0 up to, 5, 6, 7 children, on average 2. She's going to produce on balance 30 kilogram of matter, of physical matter. Okay. So if you were to compare the female body to the man body, which is where I want to start with traditional Chinese medicine, if you want to compare the female body to the man body, and they were both factories, maybe the male factory produces envelopes, like a simple product, sperm. Yeah. And the woman is going to produce a whole car. Okay. It's a car manufacturer. So when you look at the dashboard of these two factories, of course, the dashboard of the woman is a lot more sophisticated. There's oftentimes on social media this joke of, what's on a man's mind, and there's an on-off button. What's on a woman's mind? And you have all of these buttons. Yeah, it's a reflection how people feel, and so then you look at you try to take all of the other symptoms and look at what else is the body saying. The migraine makes so much noise that you don't see anything. What else? Do we have endometriosis, like you mentioned? Do we have MCAS? Do we have irritable bowel syndrome? Do we have a leaky gut? Do we have really itchy eyes and dry eyes? Do we have eye discharge? Do we lose our hair? Do we have thyroid issues? Do we have bloating? Do we have perimenopause? And what are all of these imbalances? And when you solve those, then the brain stops making so much noise.
I really love that perspective because, first of all, I want to just pause for a minute and think about, absolutely, of course, we need to look at women differently from men. Production of building humans. I think that's so rarely thought about, the fact that our hormones are much more complex, but also our literal production system of building DNA, building proteins, building enzymes. Like, we have to be well nourished. We have to be well recovered. When you think about the lifestyle of most women, being well nourished and well recovered is extremely difficult because we generally have more jobs, if you will, than men. So in a given relationship, let's say a husband and a wife will have a full-time job or at least a part-time job. So will a husband, paid work. Then the woman takes I think it's still about 2/3 more of the childcare responsibility than the men, at least 2/3 more of elder care responsibility, and all what's known as the mental load. So when we're talking about the brain inflammation could be directly related to how many socks does she need to buy for this school year? Was this permission slip filled out? Did the mortgage get paid? Yada, yada, yada. And not only that, but women are carrying an emotional load of everyone else, right? They're carrying how their teenagers are feeling, how their grandparents are feeling at the end of life. Where is everyone living? How close or how far? Who's organizing Christmas or holidays? So I think when we think about the work that women produce, they're so much more productive that without the adequate nourishment and recovery, of course, the systems are going to begin to break down. So tell me a little bit more about, so now you've got this perspective on migraines. It's like you're looking at all of the areas which could be breaking down. The migraine is kind of the warning sign, like, hey, listen, things are falling apart here. So how are you now doing this in practice? How are you helping women directly with their migraines or any other health challenges?
So the way practically I'm doing it is I'm first asking about 100 questions. And we track every day. One of the things that is fascinating with migraine is the only way you know a person has a migraine, you ask. It's completely an invisible disability. And so we track on a daily basis where the brain is at, if it's sharp and free, if it has pain, etc. In parallel, we track a lot of other things. We track how is your bowel movement along the Bristol chart. So is it more rabbit-like or is it sometimes non-existent? There's a lot of constipation. If, for example, the woman is in perimenopause, she has a lot of bloating and a lot of dryness in her large intestine. Then through her vagus nerve, there will be a lot of, gut-brain axis, there will be a lot of dryness in her brain. So she's going to feel more dizzy, more foggy. Sometimes people will call this a Meniere's disease as well, vertigo dizziness. Or is the person having a really wet bowel movement, very, very wet every single day, and quite sharp pain, for example? So we're going to track every day the pain. We're going to track. So I have an app that is called the Migraine Heroes App. And in that we track that. We track also other symptoms. Okay, how are your hemorrhoids gone? How is your mood? How is your vaginal discharge? When you had your menstruation, did you have blood clots? Do you have fibroids? Do you have cysts? And so on a daily basis, we ask for a lot of these things, and all the symptoms need to go away. And to do that, I don't really ask people not to do stuff. I don't ask them not to have certain foods. I'm like, my job, if you have sugar cravings, my job is you no longer have them. That's my job, because the sugar craving is also a symptom. I add foods. So I'm going to ask them to focus on a couple of foods that will just completely reboot their systems. And usually we'll reboot 2 systems at a time. So that's how it works. And then because it's migraine, where it's very different than maybe some other things, is a moving target. Imagine the dashboard of a factory and imagine the cycle of a woman. Every part of the cycle, there will be different problems exposed. Yeah. So maybe, if she has hormonal shifts, the fire alarm will be indicated differently, different part of the cycle. If she has also a cycle is also a day. So some people might wake up every single day with a migraine. Do you see what I mean? And so because it's a moving target, maybe if you have COVID or flu, it will change what the body's complaining about the most. And you always have to target what it's complaining about the most and unpeel the onion from outside to inside.
Yeah. And I think that's the same with many, migraine is different, but I also think it's the same as many of the invisible illnesses that we're dealing with, because first of all, they often co-present, right? We have multiple invisible illnesses at the same time. And so I think it's just for the woman, which one is the most loud is the one she's most dealing with at this moment. And I think through the cycle, like sometimes the migraine is the biggest problem. Sometimes things are easier when hormones shift. And I think what you said about the questionnaire is a really valuable point, and why we really do need women as a part of this transition in AI medicine and just STEM transition and tech transition in general, because I do think that women really appreciate being heard in a nuanced way. So when I meet with a client, I'm going to listen to that story for at least 15, 20 minutes, whereas your average physician appointment is something like 3 to 7 minutes. So they don't even have time to hear these overlapping issues. And it's not because the physician doesn't want to listen. It's just because the system doesn't give them that time. So when a woman has a moment to slow down and really think about all of the things, not only does she begin to understand the connections, but she feels heard.
I love that you say that, because it's so true. After the tests, there's a few different services that we offer. And if we do it in person, then I have a call with them. And the call is on paper is an hour. Sometimes it goes up to 3, depending on the level of history they have. But one thing that is really common is they will be very emotional. At the end of the call, they say, oh my God, like my body is making sense. And no, I'm not erratic. And also, no, I'm not crazy. And yes, I've been chasing with the right intuition. And so they're really emotional. I oftentimes ask partners to join, because they also suffer in a very different way. They have sometimes compassion fatigue. They don't really get it. And when they see their spouse understanding and stitching all of the pieces together, and for them, it's very rational, because there's, AI and sort of data. It reassures them. It comes together. But it's so true. It's so true. It's extremely true. Because also, you know what? Also, emotions play a huge role. I'll give you an example. I had this woman really early on. she had migraines for 30 years, and she was taking 5 triptans a day, 6 triptans a day, 5 days a week. So that's just to illustrate the level of pain she was under. She's going better, 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 better. And then one day the pain spikes. It really spikes. And I'm thinking, wow, I've done something wrong. I must have given her a wrong food or a wrong instruction, or she's too long on the food, or what did I do wrong? And so I pick up the phone and I call her. And I'm like, I see that you're in massive pain again. This like rocket level of pain. And she said something I did not expect. She said, my daughter tried to commit suicide. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I had just no idea. And we talked about that. And so back to your point of being listened to, there's the listening of the physical symptoms, but there's also the emotions will also play a role. So, that mom has empathy. It's also her daughter. So she feels the pain that her daughter is feeling. And that puts her in pain as well, if that makes sense.
100%. I've had clients with things like vulvodynia, bladder pain syndromes that have had complete resolution of pain once they learn to have boundaries with certain people in their families and the emotion of a stressful time. So we do a lot of heart rate variability tracking in our practice. So we'll use, whether it's a Garmin fitness tracker, an Aura or a Whoop, something like that. And you can see the shift in that heart rate variability will translate to symptoms. Even if the person, one of the things that I see often, because I still see so many women with endometriosis, because that chronic pelvic pain syndrome starts generally around women, they're like 8 to 12 years old, they're pretty young. They learn to really power through. So they've disconnected from, and I'm sure many women with migraines have the same issue. They're so used to that level of pain that they don't really feel it anymore, but the heart rate variability catches it. And it will also catch it when it gets a little worse because of, whatever stressor, whether it's a family stressor or I noticed Aura posted on their Instagram a couple of days ago during the US election, which was pretty stressful around here. People slept, 23% less or something like that. I don't remember the exact data, but their heart rate variability was, 19% worse on average. And they're looking at, thousands of people are seeing a big shift just from a national stressor. So if you're thinking about a family stressor or an individual stressor, absolutely, that will translate directly to a spike in symptoms. So with your technology, you're taking a lot of data. It sounds like you're also monitoring some data as well.
Yes, so we're monitoring so that we see until the pain, I always express, the pain decreases in intensity and in frequency until it disappears, which feels completely surreal. Because if we take back the example of your endometriosis 8 to 10-year-old, these women, they're not born with pain, absolutely not, but they've lived for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years in pain.
Yeah.
To be told that it could only be medicated, they go from episodic to chronic pain, takes completely over their life, their relationships, their work. They might be fired a lot for that. So it completely takes over life. And so, yes, so we monitor that it goes down. And so we monitor it hand in hand with their cycle. And we explain, I think a lot of what you said is so true on they need to understand, take the time and understand. So we try to teach them. It takes me 1.5 years to train a new health practitioner, but we teach everyone themselves, and they really love it because then they feel they have a mastery. Like the weather changes, they're like, and I got that infusion and I passed through the storm like a flower, and that was just so cool. Or they will say, we have in the app, it's called the Migraine Now button. I'm like, you can click on the button if you have a migraine, and it's going to guide you what to do in that instance for you as a person. And this, I did that, and I avoided 3 days of pain. I feel powerful. I feel the anxiety of the next attack. So here, there's even in the sharp and free days, people will report they have anxiety of the pain to come. So they struggle to enjoy the moment, and that is going to start to really, really slow down. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, and I think that's so important because we do have all of these tools, right? We have nutrition, we have supplementation, we have nervous system regulation tools like breath work and movement practices, and literally just things like sleep and hydration that
Mhm.
sometimes people miss. And we have medications when necessary. But I think when the person living with the chronic symptom begins to have mastery over those tools and how they relate to the symptoms, it doesn't feel so much like this is random, that they don't know
Mhm.
when the pain is going to happen, that they don't know when the symptoms are going to happen. And they don't feel as scared that they're going to be like lost at sea without the capacity to bring it back. And so just by reducing the fear, you're actually going to impact the symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because you decrease the fear, the constant fear. Absolutely. Yeah. So they feel more understood. There's this woman. She was saying, "I've been to the doctor for last few years. I've had dizziness 8 out of 10 every single day. I've done every MRI, every blood test, and they're telling me no, everything is normal. It's in your head." And she's like, "I am dizzy." And so I think women can be having these really difficult experiences where they express a symptom and they're completely gaslit. There's a bit of a deaf dialogue going on. Now, you have to go to the doctor. You have to do your MI. You have to do your blood test. This is extremely important. There's a lot of other things that need to be ruled out. But if the doctor says, no, it's in your head, I don't see anything going wrong with you. I think it's just part of being a woman. You're in pain. Yeah, that's part of being a woman. You have a lot of clots in your menstruation. That's part of being a woman. You have mood swings. Yeah, that's just you. But that's just you. That's just you. If people say that, then they're not equipped to solve, because we're pre-disease here. The body is not diseased. It's just communicating, hey, unless you do something about this, we're going to go and hit a wall.
Yeah. So, what is next for you? What do you think? How do you plan to progress this work?
Look, I think with just for now, it's really scale at a human level. I think last year we were able to take care of 30 women in parallel. Now we're able to do 100. We just released a freemium in the app because of one thing I obsess is affordability. Women can be in massive financial distress. So they're maybe single mom working sort of two jobs, having children and being in pain. And so they can't get promotion. They can be really abused in terms of salary. So there's a huge vocation because it's a business problem, you see. The best way to make money on top of someone who has migraine is just to leave them in pain and medicates them. That's the business model we're in, unfortunately. And so it's just so the freemium is designed to help people track and start to understand and start to do a few small things. And then there's an automatic plan where you don't have a human, but you have an AI guiding you. It's called Nectarine, and Nectarine's only job. We've been training her for 5 years. We're in love with her. Like, honestly, she does such a phenomenal job. She's just absolutely divine. And she's always available when it's 2 a.m. and you're in pain and you need to understand your pain. She's there. When it's 5 a.m., when it's Christmas, when it's New Year's Eve, when, in these moments of truth. Whereas as human, there's three of us around different time zones in Europe and New Zealand. But we can never, it's hard to be in that moment and to have the sharpness that she has. So we're relying on her more and more. And so the idea is, can we stop this? It's like, enough is enough. It's a billion of people. It's a fifth of women. It's a fifth of women that we just pop pills to and tell them, stop listening to your intuition. You're erratic. You're not making sense. You say wine is a trigger, but when I look at your data, it's not. And it's not because this cycle. And when you consume the alcohol, it's going to matter and it's going to change if it triggers you or not. So women just completely lose their sense of worth. And then they're told they're depressed and they say, I'm not depressed, I'm in pain. But they say, but then you are depressed. And so the idea is just it's a work of love. There's a Khalil Gibran, like a philosopher, that says work is love made visible. So this is a massive letter of love to just say, can we just stop doing this to our women and therefore to our children?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's very important that you bring up this financial piece. I was actually talking about this just today with our women's health coach students. we're always looking at how do we create more accessible and affordable models. And yet we're working with the most complex of clients. So the person doing that has to be well compensated because it's a very difficult job. And as you said, they can only really see like 30 people a year. I'm encouraged because Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City has just launched their first, a very strong looking, like sort of center for chronic illness. And they're going to be doing a lot of research, really looking at these overlapping issues because, and for them, it was inspired because they've seen a lot of long COVID clients, which is also exploding and will continue to explode until we have a better solution for acute COVID. But, the pandemic really isn't over. But COVID tends to trigger things like MCAS and migraines and a post-concussion like syndrome and cardiovascular diseases. And so it's a place where there's a lot of overlap. They're also looking at things like chronic Lyme. But even then, in an academic medical center with billions of dollars of funding, or at least millions of dollars of funding, they can only really see, because they also want to be doing research, which I think is valuable. 700 patients a year, I think, is their 2 or 3 year goal. There are billions of people dealing with this, and we're not really even touching the people who can't afford to deep dive into some of these more expensive options. And yet, I think you're exactly right, because the skill set or the tool of AI bots, if they're well trained, are actually a really good option here.
Yeah. Yeah, because the solution, we're trying to make it super easy to implement. We're really a solution in your pockets that you can have anytime you need and that you can not have anytime you don't need. And it's in your kitchen. When I started this, investors said, "Oh, you're solving the problem. Can you make them sick longer? It's a problem that you solve it." I was like, "What? Can you make them sick longer?" I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And I really thought, wow, this is really ingrained in the way we do things, because we have a gross domestic product. So we have to produce more money. Therefore, leaving these people in pain is profitable. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not on my watch. It's just not okay. And so I completely bootstrapped. I did everything in a way that I'm like, you know what? For me, what matters is efficacy. And between my husband and I, we decided that he would do well and I would do good. And he says, it's okay that you reinvest every penny I've ever been paid has been going into making the system better and improving more lives. I've cut on shopping. I've cut on all of the female stuff. And I'm like, you know what? It just fulfills my heart with purpose just so much. Like we transform people's lives. My hairdresser, he says, "Oh, but if you give them food, you tell them what to do, then they know they don't need you anymore." I'm like, great. He's like, "But it's very bad for money making." I'm like, it's my hairdresser now. I mean, no, I want you to know what you want to do in your kitchen. This is serious. It's, life-threatening at times. If you're driving and you have a migraine with aura, it's life-threatening. And so that's why the technology. And so sometimes I said to my team, there's not enough money, and they cut on their hours and still work them. It's extraordinary. And yeah, we're making it happen. And it's really true what you say, because at the same time, I want to pay my health practitioner really well. And at the same time, I tell them, and they say, "Oh, but this one, she really has no money," or "This one, she really is in distress." I'm like, I see, embrace Nectarine. She's helping us to solve. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to, we have a lot of commonality keys. So it's one of a kind service and app. It's we're patenting it. It's very special. With that, we can solve all of the things we've already seen. But we continue to see more things. So the health practitioners, then they get focused on the very complicated things. And Nectarine, she goes where we've already seen. It doesn't mean it's not complicated. We've seen crazy things. And I have a podcast called the Migraine Heroes Podcast. And in that podcast, you will see, for example, the testimony of Cassie. Cassie said, "I've seen the most senior neurologists of all of the US. I've traveled to different states to see them. I've seen people who have written books on, for example, the topic of vestibular migraines. They were very kind. They did not solve it. You solved it. It goes back to your point, Jessica, of Dr. Jessica, of listening. Like listening. What is she saying? She's saying she has liquids in her inner ear. The doctor is saying there's nothing and that it's wrong. And I'm telling her, if you feel you have liquids, I will use foods to remove liquids. And then it goes. I'm making it sound a lot more simple than what it actually is in practice. But then it goes because you know what? She's right. Why would she lie about that stuff? Of course she's right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's important that we begin to challenge these business models because you're exactly right. And healthcare is very expensive right now. And the best business models for it, or the most profitable business models, I should say, are all reliant on people being attached to a chronic illness model, needing constant insulin or needing constant pain medication. It's a treatment over the long haul rather than these moment to moment tools of reconnecting the autonomic nervous system to the digestive system, which is really just about things like circadian rhythm alignment or eating foods that are not going to promote yeast overgrowth, which is kind of what you're saying from a Chinese medicine perspective.
Absolutely.
So the tools actually can be much more simple and much cheaper, but they do require. So do any of your clients struggle with the amount of kind of time and commitment that it takes to do some of these?
I'm a lazy cooker. And so there's always lots of like, you take the food, you put it into hot water, don't even need to boil it, and then you drink the water. You don't even have to necessarily eat that given food if you don't have the time. So there's always foods, there's always, infusions and what I call decoctions. So where you let the water boil the food for a bit longer, makes the nutrients absolutely massively bioavailable. And so, we're dealing with real people. Also, we give them always a lot of choice. Like, you can take this, they all do the job. Just pick the ones that suit your organic needs or financial needs or taste buds, just see what works for you. But these are the possibilities that will work with you and not create damage and not interact with your medications, things like that. Yeah, so it's a really special. Yeah, it took forever to build, and my friends were like, "Okay, can you not grow bigger? Grow bigger." I'm like, I'm dealing with real people, and I'm solving. I'm aiming to solve 100% of everyone's problems. So no, it will take the time that it takes because it needs to be safe and inclusive and good, and make a huge difference. And so, yeah, and so now it's becoming possible. So we look forward to having a board of doctors and.
No, I think that's absolutely, having worked with chronic illness patients for almost 25 years now, that's the right way to do it. You can't scale it if it's not complete.
Yeah.
Because you're going to, like you said, they're going to be missing the things haven't seen
draining.
Yet.
Look, you have to also put yourself in our shoes. Like I'm doing lists, sometimes I have like, okay, 25 lists I need to do today. I'm like, my brain is like, let's not do that because it takes so much brain power to look at all of the data and assemble it, etc. And so now it's more and more feasible, but there's also your own health where you have to do what you preach. Therefore, you have to be to bed on time. You can't have too much screen time. You can't speak too much. Yeah. You have to preserve your own health. And so it's about new business models where health can thrive, and we can solve problems while we can also respect the people who actually do the work. And currently, we have relied, on a subscription to medication model, which works very well for a part of the population, but it just for the common population, it just doesn't. It just makes us, I think, collectively a lot less productive.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think taking a little more time up front and prioritizing the health of the team, prioritizing those basic, is really a leadership way of changing how we address health. Because if you look at the average healthcare professional, they're not particularly healthy.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, it's very true. And so that's why, like, I think it's really a labor of love. And I think if my sister had told me I have a migraine and I had known, I had been a doctor and I had known everything I would have known, I would have told her, hey, I'm sorry, lifetime of medication. These are some of the ones that statistically work the best, but it's going to be a moving target and you're going to have to medicate a lot. And you should start planning how you're going to think about work. That's what I would have said. But I think the fact I didn't know
Yeah.
anything, you're like, okay, wait a minute, let's rethink how that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. If someone is right now struggling with migraines, where can they find you and your work?
So you can go on the App Store or Google Play and download the app called Migraine Heroes. I would really encourage you. There's a myriad of podcasts. They're in the app, actually gathered in the app. This one will be too. We also have our own podcast called Migraine Heroes, where people come and share their story. They share their story not because they're paid, but because they're like, "Oh my God, this is such a bittersweet moment. Sweet because I have just the life of my dream, but bitter because I'm like, what? I've just lost so much time." And then my website is actually called mynectarhealth.com. And there you can take the test. You can book a call. So you can really take the plan that suits your needs. If you have few migraines, go on an automatic plan. If this is really taking over your life, get more help. We'll be there to cater to your needs. Our goal is you live a life free of pain. That's how we measure ourselves, and that we're allowed to measure ourselves. And that's how we thrive and just are happy, basically.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for dedicating your STEM training to helping people living with chronic pain and migraines in particular. I think what you're developing here is really revolutionary. And I think you're doing it in the right way to protect yourself and your team and your patients and just taking your time with it. So thank you for sharing all that with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jessica Drummond. Thank you for having me.